I have to say, this is the third and final session of the series. The objective of these sessions has been to consider the impact of COVID-19, what it is having, and what will have on our cities, and what we can learn from using Milton Keynes as a case study. The first session looked at safer access and seamless travel, and the second looked at the public realm and reimagining the city centre. If anything, it's too early to draw any conclusions from the sessions, but there are pointers. One thing we are seeing is the strength of the Milton Keynes city model and opportunities in place to build upon this. The subject areas we've covered, safe travel, the public realm, the city centre and the neighbourhoods, have to be looked at together. In the short term, we must concentrate on safe travel and at the local level, develop a sound and robust local network of travel solutions, something based on citywide public bikes, e-bikes, scooter hire, local buses, microtransit, on-demand minibuses, and flexible car hire services, I would suggest. We need to create the city centre as a new civic neighbourhood and complement this by stronger local centres, building on a range of reimagined and repurposed facilities. And that covers retail, office, hospitality and entertainment, all within a people's public realm. Taking the above points and using today's technologies to build a stronger and connected neighbourhood network. These lunch hour sessions have been about the impact of the pandemic, but also about understanding how best to prepare for growth in the future. A key challenge will be to ensure we have the neighbourhoods that are fit for purpose and stronger, cohesive communities. What form will these take? I won't answer that, but let's see what our speakers have to say on reinventing neighbourhoods. Before we go over to our speakers, I'd like to say this is the last of the 3 events. After this, we'll be looking at the ideas that have been presented over the 3 sessions and use these to compile a summary document. Exactly how this document will be used has not been decided yet, but between us, that's Milton Keynes Council and the Academy of Urbanism, we will be exploring some potential themes for a 2021 programme that builds on the recommendations from the report. There are opportunities. The 40th anniversary of Homeworld 81 is coming up in May 2021. This could be an opportunity to rekindle the whole pioneering spirit of MK with a focus on innovative housing and neighbourhood livability. There's also the European City of Sport International Conference planned for June 2021, which must address many new challenges. I'd like to finish and hand over to Jazz Atwell, AOU board member and director of Kevin Murray Associates, to introduce the speakers. Yaz is chair for this session. I'd like to thank everyone from both the Academy of Urbanism and the Milton Keynes Council, and particularly the speakers and the chair for their help. Over to you, Yaz. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not going to do any preamble in terms of introducing the speaker, so I'm going to go straight to saying we've got 2 great speakers today, particularly on this wet Wednesday. We've got Michelle Provost from the International New Towns Institute. She's exec director there and is based in Rotterdam. And we've also got Will Rysdale, who's the head of housing delivery for Milton Keynes Council. It's going to be Michelle that speaks first, and she's going to talk about various kind of examples of new neighbourhoods, new towns, and share some of her experience from Rotterdam as well. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jess. Thanks for introducing me. Shall I? Yeah, thanks, Stephen, for the helping me out with the images. Yes, like Jess said, I would like to use my 10 minutes to shortly talk about what actually is a neighborhood, how we can understand it, the relationship with the community, and as far as we can say anything about that already, like what could be the lessons from this corona crisis for the future of the neighborhood. But first, the next slide, please. If you talk about what is a neighborhood, then immediately the cozy images that we know from the 50s come to mind. And we are reminded that a neighborhood originally has social origins. The aim of community building is behind it, but they evolved into an organizational principle in the course of the last century. Next slide, please. And you can clearly see that in, this is just a short piece of history, you have to bear with me. But if you look at the top image from Harlow, you can see that all the neighborhood of the Harlow is built up of different neighborhoods, and they each fall into different parts. This hierarchic building of the new town is very quintessential to the new towns of that generation, and it means also that there is a kind of a community thinking behind it, like you would have the elementary daily needs provided for in your own neighborhood, so that small scale. And if we look at Milton Keynes, then this scale of the neighborhood has been enlarged into the scale of the grid squares, but still there is an idea that people would be provided for in their daily needs on the scale of that grid square. So this is the daily life, everyday life is connected to this scale of the neighborhood. And important to note is that there is a common denominator within these plans, that they are actually designed for the car, in the sense that they will provide for cars, but they also keep the car out of the living environment. And of course that goes back to, if you notice, to the Redburn in the USA, you could say the inventor of the neighborhood principle, Clarence Stein. So keep out the car of the living environment. Now, I think I should jump right to the moment where we are. Next slide, please. Well, we could say that the corona crisis has taught us, not only the vulnerable people among us, but also the strong ones, the value of the scale of the neighborhood and of things and places and people close by. So we've our world has shrunk, so to speak, due to corona. And as they say, never waste a good crisis. There might be a chance to force changes that normally would be very difficult to achieve, but have been on our wish list for a long time. Which could be designing for people rather than for cars, and taking back the public space that actually the car has conquered from the realm of pedestrians and bicyclists. On this slide, you see a number of projects by an office in Rotterdam. And this is just one of the many offices that have specialized in the last year in this kind of projects. To change parking space or road space into spaces for people, taking back public space. So in the field of livability, inclusivity, walkability, and bicycleability, if that is a word, there is huge steps to take in this situation. To have all these services that you need in close proximity and not be forced to travel. So that is what we are seeing in Rotterdam and in lots of big cities these days. There is an emphasis on walking and cycling, and it has the advantages of improving health, improving safety. It has advantages for youth and for sports. So I think this could be one of the eye-openers that the corona crisis could possibly teach us. I would say not by coincidence, these principles of livability and public space were also one of the goals and principles of the new towns as they were planned in the 50s and 60s. In a way, they were also in Milton Keynes, but you could say that because of the choice for the priority of the car, and also the idea of community without propinquity, that scale of the neighborhood was maybe less important, or maybe you could say even neglected as compared to new towns before that. So I think there's a lesson to be learned that. In a way, we could go back, look at these goals and aims and ambitions of the older new towns and see their relevance in post-corona times. But I don't think it's enough, because apart from this small scale urban realm, we also need to take other things into account. We probably need a higher density of living to become sustainable, but also to create a basis for the amenities which have gone bankrupt or have disappeared in the last decades. Think of the corner shop, for instance. There's no way with the present lower densities that these kind of amenities can survive at the level of the neighborhood. There will also be a greater diversity due to migration, as we've also seen in Milton Keynes in the last 15 years. And I think this will also stay like that in the future. Then there's something like climate adaptation, of course. And this doesn't only have to do with green open space, but also with more ecological systems of production and consumption. It might lead to having more workspaces in the neighborhood, for instance. And last but not least, participation is something that we value much more than a couple of decades ago, when there was a priority of top-down planning. Next slide, please. Well, if you look at the, Stuart also mentioned this, that we are seeing behavioral changes in working and shopping because of Corona. Financial Times already reported how there was less commuting to London, which might become a permanent fact, and which might become profitable for local shops and local centers. So it could be a chance for local centers in Milton Keynes, which are kind of, well, what's the word? Probably shabby if you look at the local centers in grid squares like Netherfield, for instance. Also, there is this continuing trend of more internet shopping, which could be exacerbated by the Corona aftermath with less mobility of consumers. So that might also become a chance for Milton Keynes Centre to become more than just a commercial centre as it is now, more than just a shopping centre, but maybe also something of a social centre. And at least that is what it opens our eyes for, that the city needs to be strengthened at the neighborhood level with services and with workspaces and with shopping and with social amenities. Next one, please. What could be the role of designers in this situation when we are talking about reinventing the neighborhood on multiple levels? Then I think one of the things is that designers can show and visualize how an attractive future neighborhood could look like and how it could work and how it could function when it was designed according to these themes that I mentioned before. And here's just a few that I think are inspiring, a few examples in Austria and in Denmark, where a much higher density is combined with very comfortable living, but also with high quality public space, high quality public transport, lots of spaces for children and sports. And I think these kind of environments need to be visualized and need to be seen and experienced before they can actually, well, it's the best way to communicate them and to convince people that this is an aspiring future. Next one. Another a role for designers in this situation could be to visualize and design different possibilities and scenarios, not only designs, but scenarios, and to use them in the participation process. Not only to ask inhabitants what would be on your wish list, but to present them with different possibilities and have a discussion with them. So it could be based on actual possibilities, and make sure that participation becomes more than information. This is an example that we did in Rotterdam, where we actually had something like a master plan, or rather guidelines for the future of this part of Rotterdam, which was designed. And we had them on the website, and people in this part of the city could go to the website and actually sort of vote for the possibilities that they thought were attractive or fitted in their image of the future. Next. And so it also consisted of images like this. So on the top, it's the existing situation, parkways, which have a green quality, but also lacked in safety and livability for that reason. So there were different possibilities, and people could also vote for which one they thought were attractive and which one they wanted. Next one. And also I would like to stress that it is with participation, which we all agree to, that it's important to have participation of the inhabitants, that it is very difficult, but also important to include the inhabitants that are representative of the communities. And you have to use all possible means to do that, to make it inclusive, because otherwise you will be talking to the usual suspects who apparently represent the community, but not necessarily do. And we found that we ended up with many senior citizens of the white communities in this part of Rotterdam, while it was much harder to reach other groups of the inhabitants. So we actually organized events for schools, took buses out to senior citizens' homes, went out on the streets and talked to people. So it is rather, well, to do it right, it is a big project to organize your participation in a good way. But it's worthwhile, so I would definitely advise that to make this whole reinvention of the neighborhood into an inclusive effort. That's what I would like to share with you now. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. That was that was fantastic. I'm going to go on and ask Will to share his thoughts and presentation from Milton Keynes. Will, are you okay to?
I am, and Stephen's going to share mine as well. Thank you very much for that. I'm hoping that some of the points I'll make actually do tie in with Michelle's touched on some of the same points actually, which is good to know actually. And so good afternoon, everybody. As been introduced, my name is Will Rysdale. I'm the Head of Housing Delivery at Milton Keynes Council, and in a nutshell, that covers the renewal and regeneration. It covers the affordable housing delivery and also the strategic housing function. Now I've got a 10-minute presentation and I'm going to try and cover quite a few points because I've been asked to speak on how COVID-19 impacts on regeneration principles and delivering a community-led approach. And obviously could go into a lot more detail than just 10 minutes, but I'm hoping to touch on in that time what is Milton Keynes' vision for it, and what is kind of community-led regeneration, but also the impacts on our consultation and engagement that it's having at the moment, and also the impacts that we're having to think about future design to both homes and the wider neighbourhood. And some of those points absolutely touches on what Michelle's just mentioned. So if I could have the next slide, please. So I think I'll start off by saying that in my view, Milton Keynes has got a fantastic and exciting vision to be a thriving city of 500,000 people, effectively kind of doubling from where we are now, and looking to be the greenest, most sustainable city in the world. And the regeneration and renewal really ties into this. We've got a stock renewal program within that. We're going to look to bring up kind of existing homes with better insulation and sustainable energy. Again, links in with Michelle's presentation. But not only that, but we want to kind of drive this forward using the regeneration to create some economic opportunities, so jobs and skills. And so I really think regeneration will feed into this, feed into Milton Keynes Council's vision. And next one, please. So we're actually at the moment, ironically as it happens, I'm going to scrutiny tonight to take forward our new kind of, it's a community-led regeneration and estate renewal strategy. And within that, you can see I've highlighted that the vision in that is to build stronger communities where every Milton Keynes resident can live safely and securely in the greenest and most sustainable city in the world. So absolutely tying it back to the overall ambition. And originally, this strategy was drafted before I came. I started in the middle of lockdown, actually, in mid-May. So it's been certainly an interesting time to see the impact for me that it's having. But there were 4 themes originally, and following different feedback, we've extended that to 6 for the regeneration strategy, and you can see them listed across the bottom. Obviously, housing communities, health and well-being, better jobs, community safety, environmental sustainability. So more than just housing. We've been talking about the neighbourhoods, and for the purpose of my presentation, what I'm looking to do is try and kind of draw it down more to estate regeneration, because there's debate about what is the neighbourhood. Is it between kind of grid lines? Is it smaller than that? For my purposes, I'm looking at an estate renewal and regeneration. For those that know or possibly don't, there's 2 in particular that we're further advanced on at the moment in Milton Keynes, which is the Lakes Estate and Fuller's Slade. The Lakes in particular, we're hoping to get planning permission next month, actually, for phase A. It's a major regeneration scheme, so it's much more advanced. And from what my understanding from joining the council is, this started off by a talk about almost an individual block called Serpentine Court, but it's expanded out, and rightly so in my opinion, to the Lakes wide estate. We talk about the impact, and you'll see later that I come on to it, but with the strategy here, COVID-19, a massive impact. We had to extend the consultation, and rightly so again, in that it was due to end in the middle of lockdown, and we wanted to ensure that people could have their voice and comment on the strategy, so it's extended to the end of June. If I could have the next slide please as well. So I'm touching here on the impacts on the regeneration principles, and I think I have to say that we do remain committed to regeneration, absolutely, but it's got to be more than, you'll see here, more than just bricks and mortar. You know, we talk about the importance of community centres and good quality green spaces, again linking into the previous presentation. I'll come on to that a bit more, but also my stress on the employment, skills opportunities, the apprenticeships. But I think it's very key actually that we need to be genuinely community led. We need to work with the local communities in these areas that we're looking to regenerate and renew. The residents, they live in these areas. They know what's happening on the street effectively. They need to feed into us. And I've picked up some history from when I've joined the council, and I want to be kind of looking to change that. And on the back of this new strategy that we're hoping to launch, we really are kind of majoring on our kind of engagement with the community and the stakeholder groups there, the community groups, the residents, so much wider than we have done in the past. I think it is absolutely key that we do this, and I was reading a report from Localis, the think tank, the other day, and it's talking about how the government believes the government can do more on a local level, and it argues that central government needs to show greater consistency and political will in supporting grassroots community ventures. And this is where I believe we really need to come into play on the regeneration principles. So in particular on the Lakes and Fuller's Slade, I'm working with our economic development team to try and introduce effectively like a pop-up business school training session for where people are out of work either before COVID, or obviously it's had a major impact, and many more are out of work since it and during it. And we want to try and help those that potentially have always considered setting up their own businesses, for instance, but just don't know how to start on it. So I think we can be a leader in providing some training and just some guidance on how they can do this if they really want to. So absolutely stressing it's just more than the bricks and mortar. So if I could have the next slide as well, please. So I touched earlier about a community-led approach. Now, absolutely, I've mentioned that we need to work with residents, with stakeholders, community groups, but there has to be a kind of a clue of who, a decision on who owns the plan, because we can't just give everybody a blank page and say, tell us what you want and we'll deliver it, because realistically, I don't think that's going to be possible. but communication is going to be absolutely key on this one, and we need to be engaging more with the communities there and having that two-way conversation, listening to what they believe they need on the street, and actually going away, trying to work out what we can deliver with them. And it's got to be a partnership. And we need to show the political commitment and the financial commitment to taking this forward. And I believe we're doing this in particular with the Lakes and Fuller Slade, and we're looking to roll out to more estates following this on the back of the strategy being launched. But we also want to try and highlight the long-term benefits to all. So we build that trust, that common understanding that we're kind of pulling in the same direction and wanting to drive this forward. And I'm wise enough to know we can't do this on our own. We need to work with the relevant strategic community stakeholders. I've been trying to build my links internally with this as well in bringing in all the other departments, because my view previously, it might have been just led by housing, and it is much wider than that. Of course, housing is a key element of it, but I need to be working with the other teams, and there's an active kind of desire to be engaged with it, which I'm really pleased to see, and I think will be really positive in the long run. So if I could have the next slide as well, please. So this is here where I really touch on how it's impacted on consultation. And you can see here, I said face-to-face consultation has effectively paused. And as of the news yesterday, encouraging kind of office workers to work from home where they can again, and stepping back on that. I'm based in Civic in Milton Keynes, and I think it's operating at 25% of capacity at the moment. And we have to book in to make sure that we can't do that. And the office just doesn't work in the same way that it did. Effectively, it's closed to the public. So COVID's had a really, really big impact on our consultation and how we do this. And I mentioned earlier about the extension we gave to the written consultation period on a new strategy. Absolutely vital that we did that. And we're having to kind of assess how we do our consultations moving forward. But not only that, we're having to look at how we engage with our communities. And I think, taking into account the area that I'm working in, it's fair to say that they're not always as affluent areas, and we have to be aware that not everybody has broadband in there. They don't necessarily have access to digital devices, so it can't just be, okay, well, we'll speak to them, we'll email, or we'll put something on a website. We really have to look at this and find out the best options. And even if they do, we see there's a clash between video calls and video conferencing. I've put an example of Teams versus Zoom. We're on Zoom today, but Milton Keynes Council doesn't support Zoom. We use Teams. So I'm actually using my own hardware today. I have my laptop next to me from Milton Keynes to make sure that I can take part in this. And I've engaged with residents where I've had to dial into one of the residents' phones who's put me close to their computer so I can join, for instance, a resident steering group. So it's not ideal. We're trying to work through it the best way we can. I've raised it corporately as something we need to improve on, but it's a real kind of negative impact on consultation, but it's not something that we're going to let defeat us, because we need to, and we absolutely, and this is where I come in, that we have to work with our communities to drive forward the best possible change. If I could have the next one as well, please. This slide, I think, is another one that you could talk for ages on, the impacts on design, and Michelle touched on about the need for people commuting into London less, for example. But really, I think we need to say, I'm not in any order this slide now, is that there's many more people working from home, and actually we have to assess when we kind of driving the design forward and bringing forward new properties or renewing estates, actually what do people need? What do they need to be able to work from home, for instance? Because what we don't want to do, what lots of them, thousands of people are doing at the moment, is crammed into their bedrooms, craning their necks over the laptop because they haven't got an appropriate place to work from home. And so we need to really cater for this increase and think about it as we're planning forward. And I jumped over the scale of development and regeneration. Good growth, we need to see housing investment to support changing an area, but that's quite difficult to do on small scale. On the flip side to that, in bringing forward kind of huge transformation areas, brings in a lot of money to spend up front. We need to attract funding from external partners. We're also reviewing our housing revenue account at the moment. We're having to work with finance very closely on the best cases that we think we can borrow money against, not knowing how the future is going to go. The impact that COVID is having on us as a council at the moment is huge on the money that we have to save. So there's a real kind of strategic wider thinking going on, and taking best guesses on how much we can borrow compared to how much we need to repay in later years, and how much rents we're going to get into kind of service the debt, for instance. So really complicated impacts that it's having, but something that we're not letting go. So touched on the home working, but not only that, we did see in lockdown, obviously, that people were having to could only exercise a certain distance from their home, for instance, and not to use cars. So I think that really feeds into the importance of good quality green space. And Michelle was touching on that as well. And that's not, by that means, I don't just mean a green park, for instance. You used some good examples, I think, from Denmark and Austria, I think it was, is we really have to think about and work with the community about what's needed. Children on bikes, etc., might want one thing to do, exercise. The older generation might want something different, but we also need to improve the access to our open spaces as well. And it's an area we're looking at with the lakes at the moment to try and improve the access to the Blue Lagoon in Milton Keynes. But good quality green space is going to be vital. If people are working from home, there's many that don't have gardens if they're living in flats or small gardens, and people may want almost like a community garden to grow vegetables, for instance. But for mental health and for physical health, people need to be able to access these open spaces and not be stuck inside. And sadly, that's the impact that COVID-19 is having on a lot of people at the moment. You know, I take myself, for example. My wife talks to me about being shut in my study at home from almost 8 till 7 o'clock or whatever it is. Actually, we need to get out. We need to get that fresh air. It's not good for mental health. So something we've really got to look at. And again, building on Michelle's presentation again, the role of the local centre. We've seen the support that people need from their neighbours, etc., and being able to kind of purchase goods that they need without driving or without going into the centre of the city. You know, the purpose that we need to review the community centres on the estates and how these are going to cater for the communities moving forward. And one thing I noted was that I read a quote saying that the lockdown has given the country a newfound appreciation for what matters in a home and in the places that we live. The need for high quality, affordable homes within strong, supportive communities has never been clearer. I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's vital that we work with the communities in regenerating and renewing these estates to drive this forward. And out of that will come through potentially a new kind of definition of what is the neighbourhood. It'll be debate that stands there for some time. But with the negative impact that COVID is having, we need to look for the positives, and we might be able to, well, not might, we will be able to develop stronger communities and drive this forward. Thank you very much. I think that's my last slide is the next one, saying thank you.
Thanks very much, Will. If it's okay with everybody, I was going to ask the first question. I wanted to ask Michelle and Will in terms of how do we deal with the social and cultural aspects of you know, reinventing neighbourhoods. I mean, where do they go, and what kinds of social and cultural opportunities can we provide? Michelle, do you want to?
What social and cultural opportunities can we provide? Well, I think the needs that have become apparent recently maybe have been there for a while, but they have just been exacerbated by Corona. Like the need, for instance, to have work closer to home, or to have work in the neighborhood, or to improve both local centers as well as public space. I mean, it's just that the urgency has become so much bigger, but I don't think they are new, completely new. And I think they're also not very contested. Like they offer advantages for each and everyone, probably. But especially in the socially disadvantaged neighborhoods, I think the opportunities would be embraced and are needed the most. Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just come in as well? Because something I wanted to mention in the presentation that I kind of skipped on it actually, and linked to social and cultural, is actually what we can do for local residents. For instance, I touched on about people that may be out of work or want to set their own businesses up, but actually I think the regeneration can drive forward some economic growth potentially with local supply chains, because we're talking some big build projects, and they can offer potentially apprenticeships and new employment opportunities as well, and encouraging people back into work and helping out on that as well.
Yeah, and one other thing is that the Corona crisis also forces local and national governments become, well, to have budget cuts or to become very frugal on some in some fields, and money is going to be a problem sooner or later. And I think the question that we that has been asked by many people already, how do we spend the available money? And in this case, I think it should be steered towards these changes that we want to see, instead of repairing the old situations that we were maybe not so happy with. And it's always easier, and the voices are strong to repair the status quo. But well, that is something that I hope comes out of this crisis, that this crisis is used to make changes for the good. And it is possible, but it's of course that is something political.
Thank you. The other one from me is, how do you define a neighbourhood? Is there a definition in terms of what the neighbourhood provides, the services or facilities, or is the definition in terms of walking distance or travel distance? How would you define neighbourhood?
Well, I think it's good to mention that a neighbourhood is not the same as community. Mm-hmm. So a neighbourhood can contain many communities. So the physical and the social entities are not the same. Well, that's also nothing new. Think of Melvin Webber, who already took this as his starting point for Milton Keynes. And of course, since internet, this has become even stronger, that communities exist even without a physical footprint. But if you talk about the physical size of a neighborhood, it is, well, I think it's amazing to see that even from the ancient times, the number of 5,000 people is accepted as a sort of a size of 5,000 houses is accepted as the size of a neighborhood. But of course, this varies. So and this is also a cultural thing. Mm-hmm. It's not the same in every country. Just like I saw someone ask the question about density. This is also a very cultural defined phenomenon. Like what are you used to and what do you accept?
Yeah, on the back of that, so I'd agree with the vast majority of that actually as well. And you can have many different communities in a neighbourhood, absolutely. And one thing that we look at is where we've been engaged. That's why I mentioned in my presentation, I've kind of drawn it around an estate side of things, because we've had a lot of different communities within the estates. But I think we need to learn from the past where we've drawn red lines around areas, because that absolutely kind of discounts people, which we don't want to do. We want to be as inclusive as possible. But possibly there's lots of debate that goes around. Is it a 15-minute neighbourhood, for instance? But I think it is where in post-COVID that people can walk to get to facilities, etc. And what we don't want to do necessarily is drive people out of their neighbourhood to a further distance to other neighbourhoods, and the community centres, for instance, become vital. So you can form the neighbourhoods around community centres, and that might be shops, it might be a community centre itself, or other services as well. And I'm seeing that with the Lakes Estate at the moment, where we've got a community centre. It's been run down, and actually we're looking to try and regenerate it. But the impressions that we're getting from the residents down there, for all that they want a centre in the new regenerated kind of estate as well, and because they see themselves as a neighbourhood, and I think that is absolutely vital.
Thank you. Michelle just touched on it, but if I can ask Claire St. Martin to unmute and ask her question.
Hi, yeah, I just wondered in terms of the sort of government's push for densifying neighbourhoods, and in their white paper they talk about planning for the future. They talk about renewal areas, and within those gentle densification is advocated. Is that something that you're looking at in Milton Keynes? And if you are, how have residents responded to that?
So I need to unmute, don't I? So we're working very closely with planning at the moment, and we'll be kind of drawing up the response to the white paper. But from my perspective, it's going to sound a bit of a cop-out answer, and I don't mean it in this way, but we're guided by our kind of Plan MK at the moment on the densities, and that hasn't changed from us at the moment. So we look to work in kind of consultation with the communities, for want of it, and working with them about how kind of densified the area is going to be. We have to recognise that we've got a housing need. And I think that is key. So I think there's likely to see more building coming through as well. But on the flip side, we absolutely understand the balance, as I touched on earlier, of having the good quality open spaces and public realm areas. So there has to be a balance on that. And this is further kind of, this is made more difficult, I would say, that post-Grenfell, because of the heights of buildings that you can build to. And there's not that many tall buildings as such in residential in Milton Keynes. It's not something that we're looking to do at this stage, is my understanding of it. But we're lucky with the amount of green spaces here. But there's going to be a balance going forward, because we do need to service the housing need as well.
Yeah, I just wondered, are you looking at reducing the car parking in particular to allow greater density in some of these areas?
So I actually couldn't answer that question, because that would be a planning one for planning colleagues. I've not heard that they are, is what I said. So they still give me the parking numbers that we need to meet when we put our planning applications in.
I think I would like to stress that to strive for density in itself is maybe not so interesting. Yes, of course, there needs to be more housing, but density as a goal, I don't think is very good. Also not to communicate and to explain to residents, but you could see density as a way to achieve a much higher quality in some other fields that you aspire to. So a higher quality in the living environment, in the maintenance of public space, but also in the availability of shops and other amenities. And in the way that you can make this new neighborhoods climate adaptive. So I would see density as a means to an end. And of course, like I said, this is a cultural thing. The images that I showed from Vienna, of course, Vienna has for like a century already had quite high density social housing. But the other example I showed was in Denmark, where there is, just like I think exists in the UK, a preference for single family houses. But now in the renewal of they are also in the train of reinventing their neighborhoods, and there the higher densities are accepted because of the advantages that they give in a larger environment.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Robert Gifford and see if Robert could unmute himself and just make the last point that he's raised, because it relates to the density issue. Is Robert there?
Yes, sorry, I've unmuted. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, actually, it wasn't me. It was my other half who's sitting here with me. And she whispered in my ear, which I think is quite right. Won't there be a significant reaction against density and densification because of coronavirus and the threat that it appears to pose in areas of high population density?
Good question. Well,
Yeah, I was going to come in just quickly, because I absolutely agree with that, actually. And it is something that we are looking at. And I raised a question a few weeks ago, actually, with if we took in apartments, flats into consideration, for instance, are we going to have to look to build in kind of wider communal areas in these flats, for instance, and wider walkways through them, and what happens with the use of lifts in these flats? So I think there will be a pushback on it personally, and I think it will have to be a consideration going forward. I think you can still do it with regards housing, for instance, but in particular in the flats, I think that is a consideration. It is obviously wider in the houses as well. I see what, as you say, your other half is saying, but from my perspective, I've certainly referenced it in regards to apartments and flats more recently.
Yeah, I think for high rises, I think it's a fact already. here in the center of Rotterdam, when I look out of the window, I see these high rises that are empty now. These are offices that are not being used anymore because of the lifts, and they cannot be used safely. But of course, density is not the same as high rise. And well, at least it doesn't have to be. And I think in places like Milton Keynes, high rise is not the first typology that I would think of.
No, I'd agree.
Just connected to that as well, Fiona Robinson makes the point that she says, isn't the issue about overcrowding, not density? I think that's what Michelle was just saying as well. Yeah. She says she totally agrees with Will's points about the design of buildings, but the density itself isn't the issue. Yeah. Which I think, yeah, is the point. Can I ask Diane Sutton to unmute
yes,
and just ask her question? Diane, do you want to just say where you're from? And I meant to ask that for the others, but.
Right, okay, yeah, I'm a resident of Milton Keynes, basically. And in fact, earlier on, Stuart at the introduction actually mentioned the Homeworld exhibition site estate. I actually live on the Homeworld exhibition site estate in Milton Keynes. I'm very interested in all this issue here. But basically, rather than the question, I was trying to just pass the comment there where we were talking about what is the size of neighbourhood, and and make the point that, you know, even though you have a school within walking distance, okay, with parental choice nowadays, parents choose to actually get in a car and drive their children to a school elsewhere rather than walk them to the school, you know, kind of in their neighbourhood. And of course, the other knock-on effect of that then is that the children don't know the other children in their neighbourhood because they don't go to school with them, because they go to school with children elsewhere, and so you lose, you know, the potential community interaction there amongst the school children.
Yeah. Does anybody want to come in on that?
I think it's a point that's very well made, actually. There is obviously, if you can choose your schools out of area, if there's if there's spaces, for instance, but it's something that from a housing perspective we can't overcome. We can link in when we're planning the developments and see what assistance we can give schools if they've got negative Ofsted ratings, for instance, and try and help improve them with any funding at all. But it's a much wider piece on it. But I think it is a point that's well made.
Michelle, did you want to come in? What are the experiences in some of the communities that you work with in terms of schools and parents being able to choose which school their child goes to? So instead of going to the local school, might be taking their children by car to a school further away, or does that not happen?
It does, but I think key is to raise the quality of bad schools.
Yes.
And then, well, that's a simple answer, but it does the trick. So there is, and I think it is, well, isn't it unacceptable to have schools that are not good enough, so that people will take the car to? I think that should not happen.
Yeah.
And that's the point I was making with Michelle as well. Exactly, that is that the key is that we could potentially help invest to bring up schools to the standard. Absolutely. Yeah,
and I also think like the attractiveness of neighborhoods depends a lot on schools, on the quality of schools. So even if you renew all the houses or have the best houses possible, if parents cannot find a right school for the children, they will probably move elsewhere if they have the choice. So I think good schools, elementary schools, are key in any regeneration project.
Can I just ask, linked to that, how does that work in a regeneration process where there must already be existing schools and so on? How do we ensure that we enable that kind of you know, all the moves and steps that you've been saying we need to do? How can you do that in an existing community?
So it's a tricky question, isn't it? And it's a difficult one to answer, but a lot of it's going to come from engagement and finding out why. You know, there's so many factors into what could be making a school not performing well. And also sometimes it's a case, it might be staff, and actually it might not be, it might be a false impression of the school, for instance, that's had in the past. So it's getting that understanding. And I'd say it's also quite a tricky one, because actually it depends on when the Ofsteds were done, because it's the Ofsted rating that potentially can impact on the school quite directly on the quality of it and what people's impression of it is. But actually with the regeneration areas, if you look to actually embrace with the school to start with and get them involved in the process and understanding of it, they will work with more residents, and actually you can start changing that, but that is subject to the school performing well.
Yeah.
But they will also then hear the feedback from the area, because from a school's perspective, they're not going to want to be having empty places. And actually also with regards to the kind of effectively like the Section 106 contributions on education, for instance, where we're increasing numbers, actually how do we make best use of that to improve the local schools that are there? Because it might not be a case of building a new school. We might not tick that number to build a new school, but actually we need to put the money into improving what's already there, and that might be facilities. But it's such a wide kind of ranging question about why the school has that kind of, people have the view of the school.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Kevin Murray?
Hi, my question, it does link to density as well, I guess. It's one about the public space. So Michelle's showed a lot of key public space, hard and soft, in her images from different cities. And Will also referenced public space, particularly green space, quite a lot in his presentation. And the question is really this, that clearly public space, and we've seen it also in other places with reallocated road space in the COVID era. For the future, many authorities, and I think Michelle has just said this earlier, will have diminished resources. So municipalities won't have the money to spend and so on. How do we look after that public space such that it will be safe for wider public use? Is there a role for volunteering? Is the fact that maybe more people are staying in the neighbourhoods and working from the neighbourhoods, does that change it? And could that put an unfair burden on some communities rather than others? So it's really just a question about the public space, hard and soft, to both, really.
Michelle?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, but it's rather early days to answer it, and also it changes a lot if you answer the question for an environment of the inner city of Rotterdam, or the city of Milton Keynes, which has an abundance of green. So I would say volunteering is very much in. Well, I'm not sure if it's in place in Milton Keynes, but here in the center of this city, it definitely is. So people sort of adopt a place next to their building or their house, and they enjoy it, so they take good care of it. How that works in Milton Keynes, I'm not so sure, and that has to do with the sheer quantity of it, of green space. So I think you are right in assuming that if people work, if stay at home more, and maybe use their immediate environment also a lot more, that they will at least become more aware of this space. I'm not sure if that also means that they will take more care of it. So I don't have, or we'll have to see that. That's one of, I feel sometimes like we're sort of guinea pigs in an experiment. And yeah, this is one of the things that I don't know the outcome of.
I come in as well, if I may, just quickly. I saw someone just message something, a point I was going to make, as well as obviously to reference the Parks Trust of Milton Keynes. But within the kind of regeneration renewal areas, it's, the point and the question is really valid, and it's really good, actually. It's something we're looking at the moment. So with the lakes, we're about to try and work with the residents and the community groups on how we can improve the public realm and listen to their views. We can go with an idea of what we think should be done, but then listen to them. But I think if we expect people to maintain it themselves, that could create an unfair expectation on some communities compared to others. But actually, let's have the conversation early and find out what the communities want. Because I referenced, you'll have picked up in my presentation about the potential for community gardens. There's a potential for allotments to come forward, or more allotments to come forward, I think, kind of post-COVID. No definites around it, but I mentioned about people, for instance, maybe wanting to grow their own produce. I worked previously on Aylesbury Garden Town, and some early community gardens took kind of hold really well, actually, and there was a real buy-in into it. So it's that early kind of conversation, finding out what people want and what the expectation is as well. And it will obviously depend on the type of kind of public realm that's brought forward as well, whether it's hard, soft, whether it's a large part, for instance, that the residents, you know, wouldn't be able to maintain themselves. So it is a huge kind of two-way conversation in my view.
And of course, residents will always ask, yeah, well, what's in it for me? Mm-hmm. So they might, you can't just expect that they will take over maintenance tasks from the council, but they might, a number of groups might have an interest in creating a collective garden or something. Yeah. So I think it's a two-way thing. So the council should probably also give this level of freedom to residents, which is also a hard thing to do for a council.
Thank you both. We're going to have to wrap up now. I think I've got a minute left, 2 minutes. Thank you both, Michelle and Will. Some of the threads that I've drawn from this is thinking about what the definition of a neighbourhood is and recognising that it's not the same as communities. Neighbourhoods are very different, and maybe more about the physical rather than the social and the cultural in terms of what happens in those places. It's really important to listen to the communities that already exist, but even for new towns and new villages, it's understanding what people, you know, what people's preferences are, what people would like to see, how people move about and so on, their choices, and ensuring that we engage with all and not, as we often say, just the usual suspects, but it's kind of the whole range of people and backgrounds that make up communities, including, you know, obviously people with disabilities and so on as well. Thinking about the density issue and looking at it from the point of view that density versus overcrowding. So density is good, but avoiding the overcrowding issue, which has knock-on impacts because of COVID and so on. The importance of good local facilities, particularly facilities and services like the schools, from everything from them being good performing schools, so people don't feel that they have to go out of their own neighbourhood to send their schools, but other services as well. And it's the investment that we need to put into those that counts. And the community ownership side of things as well, and community governance and community responsibility that is needed to encourage that kind of community element, and you know, almost linking it to that small neighbourhood kind of feel where people know each other. And for me, essentially, I think it comes down to a quality of life perspective in terms of, you know, what do we feel when we create these neighbourhoods, and are people, you know, whoever they are, attaining some kind of quality of life. So thank you all for your views, and thank you all for the questions. I wanted to do a couple of thank yous. So obviously to Michelle and Will. I wanted to thank Shane Downer, Stuart Turner, Neil Sainsbury and Fiona Robinson. With the exception of Stuart, the others are all with Milton Council, but Stuart is an AOU academician and local member. Want to thank Stephen, Delano and Olga at the AOU for running all of this. And most of all, thank you for taking the time out to attend today, and hope it was useful for you all. Just quickly to remind everybody as well that we've next for the AOU is a session on Friday with Jennifer Keesmatt, which we mentioned at the start, at the introduction, but in case some of you missed it, we've got Jennifer Keesmatt, the former Chief Planning Officer for Toronto, in conversation with Kevin Murray, a former chair of the AOU, putting some questions to her. So if you are interested, she's a great speaker and really kind of fascinating take on things as well. So, you know, everybody's welcome. Please go to the AOU website for more details. Thank you.
Thank you.